Hey, I'm Max Clark. I want to share modern day realities for security teams. I think now we're supposed to call them SecOps teams because, we love acronyms in tech. And we had DevOps and People Ops and HR Ops and Sales Ops. Now we have SecOps, which also then means that we have SecAs, Security as a Service, just as a tangent. Some profile, okay? Without getting too specific, company is a unicorn, right? So over $1 billion in market cap, over 1,000 employees, has a dedicated security team. We talk about that kind of profile of what kind of IT resources you have in that size. Usually, depending on how you break down your help desk service, what your like traditional IT function is, then if you have network engineering, any sort of like database team, specific application team, like that's your IT team. For 1,000 people, hopefully you've got more than 10 people on your IT team. You should be like somewhere between 15 and 20. Otherwise, people are probably so burnt out they don't even know what's going on anymore. If you're a tech company, obviously you have a lot more people in IT. Actually, probably not IT. You probably call them engineering. You have a DevOps team, and then you have an engineering team. You have a software development team, and you might have at that point 200 engineers actually developing software. But then if you think about it and you go back and you look at what your actual IT team is, maintaining your infrastructure and your actual internal resources for your employees, you're going to have a small team. And thankfully also with automation and tooling nowadays, if you're not running an MDM or a UEM, go out and get one, because they will make your people's lives much better and make it much easier for you to manage your devices. Okay, anyways. So this company, so we said unicorn, 1,000 employees, reasonable size IT team, actually has a dedicated security team. That security team has 4 people on it. There's a manager and 3 people. That's actually a pretty large team. Now, what came out and the reason why they have this team and why there's a dedicated security function is because of compliance mandates. They have compliance mandates that they have to adhere to in their business. What their business does actually also generates an actual need for them to have this presentation and security. So I'm talking with the director of this security team, and let's just call it like just venting therapy, like just what's going on, what they're dealing with, what I'm seeing, with other clients and other companies, what's normal, what's not normal, what are they doing, how does he manage his day-to-day life? And the thing that he said to me was, to paraphrase, was something along the lines of, he's well paid and he has no real ability to make a meaningful difference for the business because of budget and handcuffs that are placed on him. So what he can and cannot do and how he can and cannot influence things within the organization. And that he knows that he is there effectively to check a box. So that way the company can say they have this function, and also to serve as the fall guy. So when something does happen, and he expects it to happen, just a matter of time. And, as much as they try with the resources that they have available to them to prevent something from happening, he knows that it's just their threat surface is just too big. The value for, outside of just some sort of automated ransomware style attack, the value of their data and of their logo is just too high. It's just a ticking clock. Like it is just a ticking clock. And of course, he hoped that when it does happen, that they're able to contain it and prevent it as much as possible. Like he's looking at this like a, not even a prevention at this point. It's just a detection and containment as quickly as possible to limit damage, right? But very much in this position mentally where he knows that his job, he's there. So that way, when it does happen, he's the one being shown the door, and it gives the company and executives above him the ability to say that, yes, they have it, meet their compliance obligation, and then also, hey, it was that person's fault that this happened. Out you go. I've been in similar situations. Personally, I've been in similar, not this like specific example, but I've been in similar things. It's incredibly depressing to be in this role, right? And it's incredibly depressing to be on the other side of the conversation and to listen to somebody who is earnestly trying to do the best they can with the resources that they have available to them and genuinely wants to improve things and protect the business. And really, when we start talking about protecting the business in this case, protecting the jobs of everyone else working for the company. If you have a significant event that results in loss of goodwill, downtime, significant outage, loss of revenue, loss of client, public perception, like whatever these things are, the long-term effect of that, I don't want to say long-term, the relatively like short to medium-term effect on that usually ends up becoming expense rationalization. And the fastest lever that a company can pull on is employment and layoffs. If a company loses 20, 30, 40% of its revenue and doesn't have a path to replace that quickly, and doesn't have a long runway in the bank of capital to pull on, there's not very many decisions that company can actually do in order to maintain. Like, it's just a reaction, that happens. And it's a weird position to be in, to really trying to to solve an answer for this. And I feel like there's a lot of things in tech and IT that fit in these ones. I rant about this all the time. People that are doing purchasing based on trying to say, what's the ROI for this? There's a lot of things in IT that do not have measurable ROI against the purchase cost or the contract cost. Cybersecurity, things that have ROI attached to them can be measured because they have an impact on your productivity, or they have an impact on your revenue, or they have an impact based on reducing expenses, which is probably productivity. If you're trying to measure ROI, you're measuring ROI against financial metric that's in one of those buckets. We can make our team more efficient so we can do more work with the same amount of people. Okay, we can measure ROI with that system. We can move into a new market, or we can service more customers and we can generate more revenue. You can measure ROI with that. We're currently spending this much money on something and we're going to change it. We're going to bring this other system into play, and that's going to reduce our overall expense, which usually also means you're going to gain efficiency as well and probably revenue increase. We can measure that ROI. Let's talk about things that you cannot measure in terms of ROI. You cannot measure, you can measure the cost of outages. You can say, let's say you're an office based. If your office is offline for 2 days, what's your loss in productivity? And then you can come up with a number and you can say this is our potential risk threshold. I have not seen many companies actually use that as something to contract to mitigate that risk. Let's just say $1 million. Let's say if you have an outage at your office and it costs you $1 million in lost productivity because people can't work. You can't fulfill orders. You can't service customers. People can't come in. It's a little bit antiquated nowadays because hopefully you're mostly cloud-based and you have the ability to work from home. But let's just go with the example for a second. Let's say it's $1 million outage. And let's say there is, for $100,000, so for 10% of the potential risk on the table, you can alleviate that $1 million outage. The buyer's mentality and psychology that then comes into play is, we're probably not going to have that outage in the first place. So if we do have the outage, it's going to cost us $1 million, but we're probably not going to have that outage. So therefore, if we spend $100,000 to prevent this outage from happening, then, we're wasting $100,000. We've increased our expenses for $100,000 and we have no return on investment to show for it, right? And again, when that event does happen, let's say the outage occurs and you save yourself that $1 million outage, there's not a correlation process that then runs and say, hey, our ROI on this $100,000 was 10x. We saved $1 million here, this was positive for the business. It's very disjointed and disconnected. And this also comes up in other places, right? And I think risk mitigation is a big place where I see this a lot. And I'll say risk mitigation from the sense of backups, disaster recovery, business continuity, cybersecurity. These areas, they're very difficult from an ROI standpoint to quantify and say, if we deploy an EDR, it's going to cost us X dollars per device that we have to have this EDR running on. And now we have a quantifiable reduction in risk or potential exposure. And so therefore our ROI is Z. It's not connected linearly. Backups. We have to have backups for our data because if we have an outage, this is going to be the impact of the business. And by the way, best case scenario is you have an impact of the business that's a few days that leads to a then staggered, return to operations. In a lot of cases, disasters at these scales can lead to the business failing. And this is actually way more fragile than people really anticipate or think, but you cross a point where your customers stop doing business with you and they don't come back. And if you have an outage of that length and you've crossed that point where your customers are making alternative plans, once that starts happening, that revenue doesn't come back to you. And that becomes death spiral of the business just going out of business as a result of whatever event it was. So cybersecurity, backup, disaster recovery, business continuity, these are the areas I see this in the most. In terms of that disjointed ROI, trying to come up with some sort of ROI. What you're really investing in is you're investing in the survival of the business. I mean, that's what you're investing in. You're investing in the survival of the business and the continuous employment of your employees. That's what you're investing in. I've asked anyone who's had a cybersecurity event or data loss or a disaster that required some sort of DR, disaster recovery or business continuity plan, ask them about the event that they went through and what their takeaways from those events. And I will tell you that any single person that went through that that is absolutely not going to be in a situation where they would like, the risk is not reasonable anymore. If you've had the experience, you don't accept the risk. There is never a conversation with anybody that's gone through this process on any of those situations that say, oh, the likelihood of it happening isn't that high, so we don't have to spend the money to protect against this thing that I don't think is going to happen because it's never happened to me. You have a lock on the front door of your house, not because you've been burglarized, but because the risk to you is not acceptable because the amount of people that have been burglarized for not having locks. You have a lock on your door. You should have backup. You need to have a cybersecurity program that makes sense. Why? Not because you've experienced the event yet, but because you don't want to experience the event. You don't want to experience the event. You don't want to have data loss. You don't want to have ransomware, and look, there's no such thing as perfect. My wife tells our children this, like it's a thing, where if now to the point where if myself or my wife say something, oh, it's perfect, our boys will say, nothing's perfect. And you're like, yeah, you're right. Nothing's perfect. It's almost perfect. Nothing's perfect. There's no perfect in data, and backup. There's mostly perfect. There's no perfect in cybersecurity. There's mostly perfect. And there's tiers of this. And it's not like oh, we implemented EDR and so now we're 10% more protected. Like a lot of these things you get huge step-ups on, Anyways, I'm going to circle back around to where I started with this whole thing. This conversation was depressing. It's depressing because of the consistency of it and the, futility of the position almost. And just the awareness of the futility of the position. It's also depressing because in this case, if an event does happen and there is a significant cybersecurity related breach and this person does lose their job because that's their role, another person's going to come in and that person's going to come in and get a blank check to fix this from happening again, because in the organizations, it's going to have the battle damage, it's going to have the scar tissue, and it's going to know it doesn't want to do it again. So it's going to invest in the infrastructure necessary to prevent it from happening again. So now we have somebody who wants this stuff and wants the resources to prevent it from happening, who won't be able to get it, will be shown the door, and the next person's going to get it. And that's the frustrating thing. And that's just the position a lot of people are put in and a lot of companies put their teams into. And it sucks. It just sucks. This is just a sucky thing of IT that until you've had a DOS attack, maybe you don't invest in DOS mitigation. After you've had a DOS attack, you invest in DOS mitigation because you don't want to experience it again. After you've had data loss, you invest in backups. After you have an office go offline for a week, you invest in DR. After you have a cybersecurity incident, you invest in cybersecurity. There's no ROI on these things in that sense of like being able to say, oh, we increased our revenue X dollars, but you've learned the lesson of don't do that again. Just don't. Anyways, rant over. I'm Max Clark. Maybe this helps you. Maybe it doesn't help you. Maybe it's just venting because I needed to vent. If you've got a story along this, I'd love to hear it. Seriously, I'd love to hear it. Comment. Tell me your story. What happened? If you can't do it publicly, send me an email, call me. It helps to talk about these things. It does. We can't fix them, but it helps to talk about them. All I can do is just be here to listen and talk to and just share some more stories, so to speak. Happy to do it. I'm Max Clark. Have a great day.
Feeling.